Welcome back, you relentless survivors. You didn't just stumble through the fire and come out breathing. You walked into it with your eyes open, knowing full well that something in you had to go. And from the outside, it looked like madness. It looked like self-destruction. It looked like you were throwing away everything people spend their entire lives trying to protect. They watched you let go of comfort like it was disposable. Watched you release relationships you'd outgrown, even when those relationships were the only proof they had that you were doing okay. They saw you step away from approval, from stability, from identities that once kept you safe, and they whispered the same thing to each other with that mix of pity and relief. They said you were losing it. They said you were spiraling. They said this was what happens when someone can't handle pressure. What they never understood was that you weren't collapsing. You were stripping yourself down to the bone on purpose. You were removing everything that could be used to steer you, scare you, or keep you compliant. You weren't reckless, you were precise. See, people who never question their lives think loss only happens by accident. They don't understand voluntary loss. They don't understand the kind of person who looks at a life that technically works and still says, "This isn't true enough. This isn't aligned. This isn't worth the cost of staying asleep." So when you walked away from what they envied, they needed it to mean you'd fail. Because if you could let go of what they're clinging to and still stand tall, then their fear would be exposed. Their compromises would look exactly like what they are. Fear dressed up as wisdom. They waited for the regret to show on your face. They expected the moment where you'd reach back, apologize, ask for your old place again. They were certain you'd miss the comfort, the familiarity, the validation. They were certain you'd mourn loudly, publicly, the way people are supposed to when they've made a mistake. But you didn't. You kept moving forward with a strange calm that unsettled them, a quiet resolve that didn't beg to be understood. You carried yourself like someone who knew the price and paid it willingly, like someone who had already accepted the consequences and found them lighter than the weight of staying false. That's when the narrative started to crack, because sacrifice is supposed to break people. That's the rule everyone agrees on, so they don't have to test it themselves. Sacrifice is supposed to leave you empty, bitter, diminished, but with you, something else happened. Every loss made you clearer. Every letting go made you steadier. Every door that closed removed another echo of who you used to be for other people. You weren't losing randomly, you were shedding dependencies. You were removing leverage points. You were dismantling the version of yourself that needed permission, reassurance, or applause to keep going. From the outside, it looked like collapse. On the inside, it felt like alignment. You stopped protecting a life that was built to be acceptable. You stopped maintaining an image that required constant self-betrayal. You stopped carrying roles that drained you just so others could feel comfortable around you. And yes, it hurt. But it was a clean pain, an honest one. The kind of discomfort that sharpens instead of dulls. The kind that teaches you what you can live without, and more importantly, what you can't. They don't talk enough about that part, about how loss, when chosen consciously, doesn't hollow you out. It reorganizes you. It shows you how little you actually need to stand upright in the world. How much of what you were carrying was never yours to begin with. You learn that fear shrinks when there's less to protect, that when you no longer cling to status, approval, or borrowed identities, threats lose their power. You learned that freedom doesn't come from adding more layers, but from removing the ones that don't belong. And that's when they started getting uncomfortable, because while they were still protecting every attachment, every label, every fragile structure they'd built their sense of worth on, you were becoming harder to reach, harder to intimidate, harder to manipulate. They noticed you weren't rushing anymore. You weren't scrambling to replace what you lost. You weren't trying to prove that the sacrifice was worth it. By their standards, you moved like someone who understood that alignment doesn't need witnesses. They couldn't read you the way they used to. You no longer reacted on cue. You no longer negotiated your boundaries. You no longer explained yourself to people who hadn't earned the explanation. And that silence, that absence of justification, that did more to unsettle them than any argument ever could. Because people who rely on control need reactions. They need you to defend, to doubt, to seek reassurance. When you stopped doing that, their influence dissolved quietly, without confrontation. You became lighter, not because you had less, but because you were no longer dragging dead weight behind you. Old expectations, old roles, old versions of yourself that survived on approval instead of truth. They thought losing relationships would isolate you. Instead, you discovered solitude, the kind that isn't lonely, but spacious, the kind where your thoughts finally have room to breathe without interruption or judgment. They thought losing stability would make you desperate. Instead, you discovered resourcefulness. You learned how capable you actually are when there's no safety net to perform for. They thought losing status would humble you. Instead, it clarified you. You realized how little titles and recognition had to do with presence, and how much energy you'd wasted maintaining optics instead of substance. Every sacrifice took something away. Yes, but it also gave you something back they didn't expect: trust. You began to rely on your own judgment instead of consensus, your own standards instead of borrowed ones, your own sense of timing instead of external pressure. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. That's the part they don't understand. They think sacrifice is a phase, a dramatic chapter you eventually close so you can return to normal. But you didn't return. You crossed a line, because once you've lived without the things you were told you needed, you can't be controlled by the threat of losing them again. Once you've seen how much of your life was built around fear of discomfort, you stop mistaking comfort for safety. They started watching you differently then. Not with pity anymore, but with something closer to quiet recalculation. They noticed you weren't chasing outcomes the way you used to. You were choosing actions that felt aligned, even if they didn't make sense on paper. You weren't trying to win their game. You were redefining what winning even meant. Your presence changed. You spoke less, but with more weight. You listened more, but tolerated less. You moved with intention instead of urgency. And somewhere along the way, they realized something that unsettled them deeply. You didn't sacrifice everything to become impressive. You sacrificed everything to become free. Free from needing to be liked. Free from needing to be understood. Free from needing to belong to systems that required you to dilute yourself to survive. That kind of freedom doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It doesn't seek validation. It just exists. And it changes the temperature of every room it enters. They can feel the separation now, even if they can't name it. The subtle distance between someone who chose truth over comfort and those who chose comfort over growth. The gap between someone who has already faced loss and those still organizing their lives around avoiding it. You didn't become better than them. You became incompatible with shallow conversations, incompatible with conditional support, incompatible with environments that reward conformity over clarity. And this is where the story doesn't resolve neatly. Because you're not done shedding, you're not done becoming. The standard you've set for yourself is internal now, and it doesn't negotiate with nostalgia. You've crossed into a version of yourself that can't go back to the old world without betraying everything you paid to learn. And you know it. You feel it in the way you hesitate before re-entering familiar spaces, in the way old dynamics feel too tight, too loud, too small. This isn't the end of the transformation. It's the point of no return. And what comes next won't look like triumph to people who measure success by safety and accumulation. It will look quiet. It will look selective. It will look like distance. But you know better. You know that what you lost made room for something irreversible. And whatever you're becoming next, it won't fit where you used to belong. You didn't just change. You crossed a threshold. And once that line is crossed, there's no language for going back. After the sacrifices, after the stripping down, after the quiet rebuilding that nobody applauded, something settled inside you. Not confidence, not arrogance, something colder, something steadier. Certainty, not the loud kind that needs agreement. The internal kind that doesn't flinch when misunderstood. You stopped asking yourself if you were doing the right thing and started asking a different question altogether. Does this align with who I am now? That shift changed everything. You noticed it first in small moments. In how arguments no longer hooked you. In how manipulation felt obvious instead of confusing. In how pressure lost its urgency because you'd already survived worse without breaking. People expected you to come back softer, more agreeable, grateful for second chances. They thought sacrifice would humble you into compliance. Instead, it clarified you into refusal. You no longer negotiate with environments that require self-erasure. You no longer chase rooms that don't have space for your full presence. You no longer explain your standards to people who benefit from you lowering them. And that's when the distance became visible. Not dramatic, not hostile, just undeniable. Some people couldn't follow you because the path required letting go of comfort they still worship. Others didn't want to follow you because your choices forced them to question their own. And a few simply couldn't recognize you anymore because the version of you they understood no longer exists. You felt the separation deepen. Conversations became shorter. Familiar dynamics felt awkward. Old jokes landed wrong. Old expectations felt intrusive. Not because you became cold, but because you became honest. Honest about your energy. Honest about what you're willing to give and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. You stopped offering access by default, and that unsettled people more than any confrontation ever could, because access was where they had leverage. Your availability, your understanding, your willingness to carry emotional weight that was never yours. When you removed that, the balance shifted quietly but permanently. They began to sense it, that you were no longer waiting, no longer hoping to be chosen, no longer seeking alignment through external validation. You were choosing yourself first and letting the rest fall where it may. That kind of self-alignment creates an invisible barrier, not one built from resentment, but from clarity. People can feel it when they approach you. The way you don't lean forward anymore. The way you don't overextend. The way you don't fill silence to keep things comfortable. You're not hard to reach, you're selective. And selectivity is terrifying to people who built their identity on being needed. You also noticed something else. A strange calm when things didn't work out, when opportunities passed, when doors didn't open. Where there used to be anxiety, there was now trust. Trust in your ability to navigate uncertainty. Trust that what aligns will meet you without force. Because you already proved to yourself that you can survive without guarantees. That's the power sacrifice gave you. You don't cling, you don't chase, you don't panic. You move forward with discernment. And slowly, subtly, people began adjusting around you. Some tried to re-enter your life with new language, more respect, softer tones, as if upgrading. Their approach might grant them access again. Others grew distant, not out of conflict, but because your presence reflected something they weren't ready to face. Your clarity highlighted their avoidance. Your boundaries exposed their entitlement. You didn't argue with them. You didn't correct them. You let distance do the work. Because distance is honest. It reveals who values connection and who only valued convenience. And in that space, something unexpected happened. You stopped feeling guilty. Guilty for growing. Guilty for changing. Guilty for no longer fitting into roles you'd outgrown. You realized guilt was just the residue of old conditioning. An echo from a time when you believed belonging required sacrifice of self. Now you know better. Belonging that costs your truth isn't belonging. It's containment. So you let go without ceremony, without announcements, without burning bridges. You simply stopped walking back across them. Your life began organizing itself around a new center. Not ambition, not survival alignment. You chose depth over volume, meaning over momentum, presence over performance. And the more you honored that, the more incompatible you became with your old world. Not superior, not detached, just different pace, different tolerance for noise. You noticed how little you explain now, how rarely you justify your choices, how comfortable you are, letting people misunderstand you. Because clarity inside doesn't require clarity outside. That's a hard truth most people never reach. They spend their lives correcting perceptions, managing narratives, defending choices that were never wrong to begin with. You stopped doing that. You let your life speak for itself, not through spectacle, but through consistency. And while others chased visibility, you cultivated stability. While others optimized for approval, you optimized for peace. This is where your transformation becomes irreversible. Because once peace becomes your reference point, chaos loses its appeal. Drama loses its pull. Validation loses its power. You don't need to prove you're strong. You've already lived it. You don't need to announce growth. It shows in what you no longer tolerate. You don't need to convince anyone of your value. You've internalized it. And that internalization changed how you move through the world. You don't rush outcomes. You don't force connections. You don't override your intuition to meet expectations. You wait. You observe. You choose deliberately. That patience isn't passivity. It's precision, and people feel it. They feel that you're no longer available for projections, no longer responsive to pressure, no longer interested in roles that require you to shrink. Some admire it quietly, some resent it silently, some misunderstand it completely. You let all three happen, because you're no longer building a life that needs consensus. You're building a life that needs coherence, and that coherence came from sacrifice, from loss, from standing in the ashes and choosing not to rebuild the same structure again. You didn't rise to prove them wrong. You rose because staying where you were would have meant betraying who you'd become. That's the difference. And now, as you move forward, you carry something most people never develop. An internal compass that doesn't panic in uncertainty. A self-trust that doesn't collapse under doubt. A resilience that isn't loud, but unshakable. You don't belong to your old world anymore. Not because you're above it, but because you outgrew it. And whatever comes next will require this version of you. Not the one who needed comfort, approval, or permission. The one who already survived the fire. The one who knows exactly what it costs to become real. And won't trade that truth for anything. Wow. Have you ever looked at a storm and smiled? Have you ever stared at circumstances that should have crushed your spirit and laughed anyway? Because deep inside, you know something nobody else knows? There is a secret the world cannot see, a power that defies logic, a joy that refuses to be silenced by struggle. You see, the people around you look at life and wonder how anyone could survive certain situations. They shake their heads at tragedy, they gasp at loss, they fear the battles that come with living, and they whisper, "Nobody survives this." And yet here you are, standing, breathing, laughing. Not because life is easy, not because your struggles are small, but because God is in you, around you, and fighting for you in ways invisible to the human eye. Laughter in the face of impossible circumstances is not a mere expression of happiness or ignorance. It is a profound declaration that God's power and protection are at work in your life. When the world sees impossibility, calamity, and despair, it often expects fear, worry, or defeat. But when you laugh despite the storm, you are demonstrating that your faith is anchored in a reality higher than what the natural eye can perceive. This laughter communicates a truth that cannot be ignored. God is greater than the circumstances that surround you. It is a spiritual response that defies logic but aligns perfectly with divine understanding. You are essentially saying, "I may be under pressure, but I am not under defeat. I may see chaos, but I see my God who controls it all." This laughter arises from a deep awareness of God's presence, even when life feels unbearable. It is rooted in a certainty that nothing can penetrate the protective hand of God over your life. When trials feel overwhelming, the act of laughing demonstrates that you trust the invisible hand that guides you. It shows that you recognize your survival is not dependent on your own strength or understanding, but on the divine power that sustains you. In essence, your laughter is a shield. It protects your spirit from despair while announcing to the spiritual realm that the enemy cannot have the victory. Every chuckle, every smile in hardship is a statement. My life is not defined by what happens to me, but by the God who holds me. Moreover, laughter in the midst of adversity carries testimony. The very act of smiling when others would falter reveals that God's protection has already manifested in your life. It is evidence that you have survived what many would not, and that survival is not by chance, but by divine intervention. It becomes a signpost for others, inspiring hope and courage in those who witness it. People may question your response to trials, but those who understand spiritual authority will recognize the power in your reaction. You are not dismissing your struggles. You are asserting that God is bigger than them. Finally, this laughter is an act of resistance against fear, hopelessness, and despair. It is defiance in the face of difficulty and a proclamation that your faith cannot be shaken by external forces. It reminds both yourself and the world that your life is governed by God's will, not by human limitations or natural obstacles. It is the purest form of spiritual victory, a sign that your joy, rooted in God, cannot be stolen by circumstances. When you laugh amid the impossible, you declare aloud that your life is under divine protection, that your story is still unfolding, and that nothing can separate you from the power of God who sustains you. Your laughter in the face of overwhelming circumstances is not random. It is born from faith, a faith that refuses to be shaken by the chaos around you. When life throws challenges that seem unbearable, most people respond with fear, worry, or despair. But the person whose laughter rises above the storm has discovered a truth that transcends the natural world. God's plan is greater than the present moment. Laughter in this context is a spiritual expression that demonstrates trust in a God who orchestrates every detail of your life. It says, even without words, I may not understand this situation, but I understand the one who does. It is faith in action, visible, audible, and undeniable. Faith-driven laughter is a response to the knowledge that your life is not controlled by temporary difficulties. While fear focuses on what could go wrong, faith focuses on what God has already secured. Your laughter reflects a perspective that sees beyond immediate challenges and recognizes the invisible hand of God guiding your path. It is not denial of reality, but a confident acknowledgement that even in the midst of difficulty, divine purpose is unfolding. In other words, your laughter is a spiritual lens, allowing you to perceive hope and possibility where others only see despair. This laughter also strengthens your spirit. When you face trials, worry can easily erode courage and faith. But laughter rooted in trust interrupts fear. It realigns your mind with divine truth. It reminds you that you are not alone, that God is with you, and that no storm is powerful enough to overturn his plan. Every chuckle or smile in hardship is an affirmation of the unseen forces working on your behalf, and a rejection of the narrative that circumstances are in control. Faith-driven laughter is both protective and declarative. It shields your heart from hopelessness while boldly proclaiming God's supremacy over the situation. Moreover, your laughter communicates hope to others. Those who witness your reaction to adversity see that survival is possible, that joy is attainable even in trials, and that trust in God can produce peace and strength regardless of what is happening. It is a living testimony that faith in God is not theoretical, it is practical, visible, and transformational. The world may expect tears, fear, or retreat, but your laughter offers a counter-narrative that declares, with God, I am not defeated. I am sustained. I am victorious. Finally, faith-driven laughter reflects understanding and surrender. It acknowledges that you may not have control over the circumstances, but you have control over how you respond, and in choosing joy and trust, you align yourself with God's purpose. It is a proclamation that while the storm may rage, your heart is anchored in something eternal and unshakable. Your laughter is the outward manifestation of inner faith, demonstrating to the world and to yourself that God's plan is bigger, stronger, and more powerful than any trial you face. Your laughter is more than a reaction to circumstance. It is a testimony. It speaks of survival, of divine intervention, and of a protection that transcends human understanding. When the world sees trials that would overwhelm ordinary people, they often assume despair is inevitable. They expect failure, surrender, and brokenness. But your laughter tells a different story. It is a declaration that God's protection has kept you intact when the natural order suggested defeat was unavoidable. Every smile and chuckle in the midst of adversity broadcasts the truth that your life is under the watchful hand of the Almighty, and that you have been preserved for a purpose greater than the trial itself. This laughter carries the weight of lived experience. It comes from knowing you have walked through storms, faced pressures, endured attacks, and survived. It reflects the understanding that you should have fallen under the weight of your circumstances. Yet here you stand, unshaken, unbroken, and even joyful. It is not arrogance nor ignorance. It is acknowledgement of God's faithfulness. The fact that you are still here, able to laugh and rejoice, is proof that a higher power has protected you when nothing else could. This is why your laughter is more than personal. It is spiritual. It is a message to the world that God's intervention is real, tangible, and powerful. Moreover, your laughter serves as a reminder of divine timing and wisdom. Often, what seems like protection is invisible at the moment. There were moments when the storm was at its fiercest, moments when it seemed like there was no escape, moments when everything in your human reasoning pointed to collapse. Yet, through unseen forces, through divine preservation, you were kept safe. The enemy may have tried to destroy your confidence, health, or relationships, but he was powerless to take what God protected. When you laugh today, it acknowledges that protection, not your own strength, was the reason for your survival. This laughter also inspires and encourages others. Those who witness it realize that survival is possible even in the most hopeless situations. Your joy becomes a light for those still in the storm, a signal that despair does not have the final word. It proves that faith, trust, and reliance on God can withstand pressures that might seem impossible to overcome. Your laughter transforms personal victory into public testimony, demonstrating that divine protection is real and accessible to those who seek it. Finally, this laughter deepens your relationship with God. It is a reminder that every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of survival is not accidental, but intentional. The preservation you have experienced is a tangible proof of His presence, mercy, and power. By laughing, you acknowledge that you are alive not by chance, but because God's hand has guarded, shielded, and guided you through every obstacle. It is a declaration that your life is a testament to divine protection, and that what the world believes is impossible, God has made possible. Laughter in the midst of trials is not simply a sign of happiness or levity. It is a spiritual weapon. It holds power that transcends the ordinary, a power that confronts fear, defies despair, and dismantles the enemy's schemes. While the natural response to overwhelming circumstances may be panic, worry, or surrender, the person who laughs in such situations is wielding an invisible authority grounded in faith. This laughter is an act of defiance, a statement that despite appearances, your spirit is untouchable, because God is your protector and strength. Each laugh is a strike against fear, a declaration that the power seeking to intimidate or destroy you has no ultimate control over your life. Fear is the primary tool the enemy uses to weaken resolve. It paralyzes decisions, distorts perception, and amplifies doubt. But laughter rooted in faith interrupts fear's influence. When you laugh in the midst of difficulty, you demonstrate that your focus is not on the threat, but on the one who is greater than the threat. The enemy may plan, circumstances may press, and pain may persist, but your laughter signals that you refuse to let fear dictate the outcome of your life. It becomes a weapon because it changes your spiritual posture. It aligns you with God's strength rather than human limitation. Despair is another tactic the enemy deploys. seeking to convince you that hope is lost, that survival is impossible, and that your efforts are meaningless. Laughter, however, serves as a countermeasure. It communicates hope and faith, even when nothing in the natural seems hopeful. By choosing joy in the midst of trials, you resist the weight of despair and reclaim a position of spiritual authority. You are declaring that circumstances may be harsh, but they do not have the final word. This is why laughter is more than emotion. It is a deliberate act of spiritual resistance. Additionally, laughter is a prophetic declaration. It announces to the unseen realm that you are not a victim of circumstance, but a child of God under divine protection. It disrupts the enemy's plans because it signals that his strategies are ineffective. When fear, discouragement, or attack arises, your laughter demonstrates that God's power within you is greater than the opposition around you. It transforms a passive response into an active stand, asserting spiritual authority over situations that seem insurmountable. Finally, laughter in trials reinforces your own faith. It reminds you that no matter how dire the situation, God is present, He is working, and His purposes are unstoppable. Each laugh becomes a reaffirmation that your trust is not in temporary circumstances, but in an eternal God whose power knows no limits. The enemy may try to weaken you, but your laughter, empowered by faith, is a weapon that pushes back darkness, strengthens your spirit, and affirms that your life is anchored in divine protection and purpose. Laughter in the midst of trials does more than uplift your own spirit. It radiates hope and encouragement to everyone around you. When people face challenges, they often look for signs that survival is possible, that joy can exist even amid suffering, and that life can continue beyond pain. Your laughter, born from trust in God and resilience in adversity, becomes a beacon of light in their darkness. It shows them that it is possible to endure, to rise, and even to rejoice when the world expects despair. Every smile and chuckle communicates a message far louder than words. Life does not end in hardship, and joy is not eliminated by struggle. When others witness your laughter, despite overwhelming circumstances, they begin to understand that survival is not merely a matter of chance or personal strength. It is the result of divine intervention and faith. Your experience becomes proof that God's power is real, active, and sustaining. People see that even when trials appear impossible, faith and reliance on God can produce resilience and even joy. This is profoundly inspiring because it demonstrates that challenges are not the end of the story. Others may feel trapped in their difficulties, but your laughter provides a tangible example that light can still shine in the midst of darkness. Your laughter also carries an unspoken message of courage. Many people hesitate to face adversity because fear tells them they will fail, that they will be broken, or that they will not survive. But your joyful response contradicts that narrative. By laughing, you show that fear does not have the final word, that trials do not dictate your ultimate outcome, and that hope is alive even in the worst situations. It becomes a form of leadership in the spiritual and emotional realm, demonstrating to others that perseverance and faith can triumph over despair. In addition, your laughter is contagious in the most profound sense. Emotions, especially powerful ones like joy, ripple outward. Those who are near you, even if momentarily burdened by their own struggles, can be uplifted by the example you set. Your laughter gives others permission to hope again, to trust again, and to believe that survival and joy are achievable. It acts as a spiritual signal that God's mercy and power are accessible, reminding others that they are not alone in their trials. Finally, your laughter transforms your personal victory into communal encouragement. It is a living testimony that what the world sees as impossible has been overcome through faith, trust, and divine protection. The joy you express in adversity not only confirms your own resilience, but also provides hope, inspiration, and motivation for others to endure, trust God, and keep moving forward. In this way, your laughter becomes more than personal. It becomes a ministry of encouragement, a declaration that God's love sustains, and a reminder that life, even amid trials, is full of purpose and joy. Your laughter is more than a spontaneous reaction to circumstance. It is living evidence that God's plan is unfolding in your life. When trials surround you, when the world expects defeat, and when every challenge seems insurmountable, your laughter declares that divine purpose cannot be thwarted. It is a sign that, despite what is visible to the natural eye, God is actively orchestrating events to bring about victory, growth, and fulfillment. Each laugh communicates a spiritual reality. Nothing, no obstacle, no enemy, and no setback can override God's plan. Your joy in adversity proves that the story God is writing in your life cannot be canceled by temporary difficulties. This laughter reflects a deep understanding of divine timing and orchestration. Often, the results of God's plan are invisible in the moment. You may face hardships that seem endless, setbacks that appear unfair, and pressures that feel unbearable. Yet, the fact that you are still standing, breathing, and laughing is proof that God is at work behind the scenes. Your laughter is a recognition that while the storm rages, the unseen hand of God is aligning circumstances, preparing opportunities, and guiding you toward the fulfillment of His promises. It is a declaration that the process may be challenging, but the outcome is secure because it is divinely orchestrated. Moreover, this laughter affirms your trust in God's sovereignty. By laughing amidst difficulty, you demonstrate that your focus is not on the chaos, fear, or uncertainty, but on the one who holds the outcome. It signals that your confidence rests in God's wisdom, power, and faithfulness, rather than in your own understanding. Your joy communicates to the spiritual and natural realms that you are aligned with God's purpose, and that His plan for your life cannot be disrupted by external forces. This makes your laughter both a proclamation and a protective declaration. It shields your spirit from despair while announcing divine authority over your circumstances. Your laughter also testifies to perseverance and hope. It proves that no matter how long the trial lasts or how intense the opposition seems, God's purpose will come to pass. By expressing joy, even when things appear uncertain, you reinforce the truth that survival and victory are inevitable when God is involved. This is a powerful witness to others who may be struggling, demonstrating that faithfulness to God, patience in adversity, and trust in His timing lead to the fulfillment of destiny. Finally, laughter rooted in the understanding that God's plan is unstoppable transforms your perspective on life. It allows you to face every trial with courage, patience, and expectation. It reminds you that every challenge is temporary, every setback is a setup, and every difficulty is an opportunity for God to reveal His power. Your laughter is a visible, audible, and undeniable sign that God's purpose is alive, active, and unstoppable, and that you are part of a plan far greater than you can imagine. It is proof that you are not merely surviving life. You are thriving under the divine plan of the Almighty.